welcome to this session and this sharing that I have for you on the CWQ tool, and we've used it for high-performing teams. And I think such a critical thing these days, you know, with so many changes that have been happening since the start of 2020 up to today, and we don't know until when this is going to end. It's really much more critical to really think about how teams need to start to come together better and work more effectively with each other. We need to understand the whys of how they're doing things also, and to build the trust. So this is something that our founder, John Bing, mentioned many years ago. This was, you know, even before virtual teams were really the train of thought and ways of working right now. But he did say that people that are coming from different cultures and different thoughts and different ways of working, you know, they need to start to work on the level of trust and communication. And so I want to share a story with you about, you know, how we've worked with and helped a Fortune 500 sales team of the region. So this is their leadership sales group, and they are all experienced team members. And just to give you a little bit of a background also about this sales team is they really have two main subgroups. So one would be the team that sits in head office, and one would be the members that would be directly working with those in the field. So issues that were coming up that we were seeing in 2020 and the early 2021 is that they needed to continue building trust. It seemed like in meetings, they weren't as actively participating and sharing thoughts, ideas, questioning, each other. They weren't really raising issues very freely. There seemed to be a bit more constraint, and changes were not being accepted as willingly, especially in being able to cascade this out into the field. So ultimately, it was impacting results and KPIs of the sales force and agents. So what I wanted to share with you now is a quadrant chart coming from the CWQ. So if you take the participants that were in, or that are currently still in that team, they're coming from these different countries. But what I wanted to highlight for you here is when they individually also took the CWQ, what we noticed is that 83% of them actually were doing things and had ways of working that were not necessarily what you would see from the original countries they're from. And if we even look at the data more detailed and we break it down a little bit more, what I have encircled here for you are the participants of this leadership team that work directly with the sales force in the field. So some things that we noticed would be that, you know, they wanted to be much more involved in being consulted, especially when strategic decisions were changed. They also wanted to discuss things more in depth before releasing a pivot strategy or a new way of doing things. And they weren't anymore very comfortable with the autonomy and independent way these strategic decisions were being made, so therefore eroding trust. Some of the things that came out in this session and all the data that we collected from this is that the participative behaviors, which is frankly a company behavior and ways of working, they ended up becoming perceived to be much more confrontational. So harmony was impacted, people were more sensitive to these differences. And what was before very easy to find, which was the candor in ways of them discussing in meetings and curiosity, you know, they were questioning ideas, not to put people on the spot, but to get to a better result. These were being minimized a lot. Number one, first, to really avoid conflict. And second thing is because they were already being perceived to be rude. So these are some of the things that came out of this data point and discussion that we had. Same group wanted to use also different dimensions of the CWQ. So we talk about power, distance, and certainty. If you notice here, you now have most of the sales team in the field being much more comfortable with things that are tried and tested. And you know, they didn't want to fall into the trap of just changing because the market is asking for it at this stage, when maybe in the near future it would go back to the, you know, original ways of working. So these were some of the thought bubbles they would have, while those in head office were much more concerned because competition was going ahead. You know, they needed to pivot. So that was one of the favorite words coming out. They needed to change strategies midway. And actually at the stage when we were doing this presentation back to them, which was in June. So imagine June, 6th month of 2021, they were apparently already at their 20-something change strategy. So it's quite uncomfortable for a big part of the group. Another thing, you know, taking another part of the dimension here is when you see them, they were very much stuck with really just following something that's tried and tested, which would be their guidelines. They needed things to be much more structured in how they would approach the market and the strategies that they would put in place. So some of the other observed team dynamics that we had were that there was part of the team that were very resourceful, addressing market needs very quickly, very easy to be able to pivot when needed to, depending on what the external factors also were coming in. And there was also part of the team that was not comfortable at all with that. They were doing things and they preferred to do things by the book. And another thing that we also noticed is, you know, we probably could be a little bit more flexible and a little bit more comfortable when it comes to being resourceful. But when other factors are not easily changed, like KPIs, which are not flexible at all. So you have a different strategy, but the KPIs do not change at all. It's very difficult to sell to the agents and to the sales force in the field that, hey, we should try things differently. And it ended up causing a really big fragmentation in this leadership team. So they, you know, you could already sense a stronger in-group and out-group tendency and consequence in all of this. But what I loved in all, you know, in being able to do this study and using the CWQ is that we were able to cull out information and dive deeply. And only through that were we able to find a team that now swore to, you know, doing action by defining norms and commitment moving forward. So a couple of things I wanted to share here with you that were, you know, came up in the session with them in the first 20 minutes. Short-term norms and actions that they wanted to start working on. They were going to be much more conscious in their team meetings to really aim for that sweet spot in the conversation, to be able to be very much aware if candor and curiosity are there, if they're able to be candid with their comments and with their ideas, and also be able to be curious to ask questions and push them forward. Another commitment they had is that they were going to now create a feedback loop before strategies are really put in place. So this is to get information from the field and be able to incorporate that into the strategy moving forward. And for mid to long-term actions that they were defining, they were going to be working with the human resource group and to try to see what is the necessary mindset really moving forward. If this is the new normal, how do we prepare our people to be more change ready, especially when it comes to, you know, working with, you know, the sales group and being able to convince clients to go for and get the results that they need.